The snow was still falling when they led Clara Bennett and her 6 children into the town square like cattle bound for slaughter. Her own father-in-law stood on the courthouse steps, reading off names and prices as if her babies were sacks of grain. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 300 people watched a woman lose everything she had left, and not one of them lifted a finger, until a stranger in a wolfskin coat pushed through the crowd and said the 4 words that would tear the territory apart. Before we go any further, if you're watching from somewhere out there in the wide world, drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happened next in Black Hollow, Montana, is the kind of thing folks still whisper about when the snow gets deep and the fire burns low. The cold in Black Hollow had teeth that winter. It came down out of the bitter roots in the second week of January, and it didn't let up, didn't soften, didn't give a single inch of mercy to the people who lived under it. The thermometer outside Cobb's General Store had cracked sometime around New Year's, and nobody bothered to replace it. There wasn't much point. You stepped outside, your breath froze in your beard before it hit the air, and that told you everything you needed to know about the weather. Clara Bennett had been awake since 4 in the morning. She sat at the kitchen table in the little tar paper house at the end of Mill Road, and she watched the kerosene lamp burn down to nothing, and she tried to figure out what she was going to feed her children when the sun came up. There was a 1/4 sack of flour in the corner, a tin of lard, half a jar of molasses that had crystallized along the bottom. And that was the whole of it. That was what stood between her 6 children and starvation. She had not eaten in 2 days. Not really. A heel of bread on Tuesday morning that she pretended she'd finished so the little ones would clean their plates. A spoonful of cold beans on Wednesday night, when Lila Mae had pushed her bowl across the table and said, "Mama, you eat it. I ain't hungry no more." And Clara had wanted to weep, but she didn't have the water in her for tears anymore. Her husband had been dead 9 months. Thomas had ridden out one morning in April to look at a horse over in Deer Lodge, and he had not come home. They found him a week later in a draw above the Clark Fork with his neck broken and his pockets emptied and no horse anywhere. The sheriff said it was probably a fall. The sheriff said it was probably bad luck. The sheriff said a lot of things, and none of them had brought Thomas back, and none of them had paid the debts Thomas had hidden from her for the better part of 3 years. The debts! God almighty, the debts. She caught herself thinking that word, and she stopped and she pressed her palms against her eyes, because she had promised herself she would not call on him anymore. Not after the last time. Not after watching her boy Caleb come down with the fever in November, and the doctor saying there was nothing to be done, and the praying not amounting to anything but a sore throat and a colder house. Caleb had pulled through. He'd pulled through on his own, on the stubbornness he'd gotten from his father, and Clara had decided right then and there that whatever was up above the clouds wasn't listening to a woman like her, and she'd best get on with the business of saving her own. There was a thump from the loft. She raised her head. The lamp guttered. She heard small feet on the ladder, and then Ruth was standing in the doorway, 8 years old and barefoot and rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. "Mama, why are you up?" "Couldn't sleep, baby. Go on back to bed." "It's cold." "I know." "Eli won't share the blanket." Clara made a little sound that was meant to be a laugh and came out more like something else. "You tell Eli I said share it, or I'll come up there and skin him." Ruth did not move. She stood there in her thin gray shift with her hair tangled around her shoulders, and she looked at her mother the way children look at adults when they have already understood things no child should understand. "Mama, is grandfather coming today?" Clara felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the weather. "How do you know about that?" "I heard you talking to Mrs. Halloran." "You shouldn't have been listening." "I wasn't trying to." Clara looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said very softly, "Yes, he's coming today." "What's he going to do?" "I don't know, sweetheart." "Is he going to take us?" "I don't know." "Mama." "Ruth, please." The little girl came across the cold plank floor, and she climbed up into her mother's lap, and Clara put her arms around her and held her, and they sat that way while the lamp went out and the dark came back into the room and the cold pressed in through every crack and seam of the walls. After a while, Ruth said, "I don't want to go with him." Clara said, "I know. He hurt Papa." Clara closed her eyes. "Don't say that, baby." He did. Papa told me. Papa said a lot of things, Ruth. Some of them weren't. She stopped. She could not bring herself to finish. She could not say some of them weren't true about a dead man who had loved his children and failed them in every practical way a man can fail. She just held her daughter tighter and waited for the sun. Silas Bennett rode into Black Hollow at 10:15 that morning. He came in on the south road with 3 men behind him, all of them on good horses, all of them in heavy coats with the collars turned up against the wind. Silas himself was a man of 62 years, and he sat his saddle the way a man sits a throne. He owned the lumber mill on the West Fork. He owned the freight company that ran north to Helena. He owned 1/3 of the cattle in the valley and 4 of the 7 men on the town council, and he was generally understood by people who knew about such things to own the sheriff outright. He had buried his only son 9 months before, and he had not shed a tear at the grave. What he had done instead was go through his son's accounts, and what he had found in those accounts was a debt of $1,140 owed to the Bennett mill, money Thomas had borrowed against future earnings and pissed away on bad horses and worse cards. And Silas Bennett was not a man who let debts go unpaid, not even debts owed by his own dead boy. He had ridden out to the little house on Mill Road in October, and he had stood in Clara's kitchen with his hat still on, and he had told her, in a voice as flat as a frozen river, that she had until the first week of February to make him whole. $1,140, plus interest, plus the cost of the funeral, which he had paid for and which he was now itemizing back to her. Clara had told him she didn't have the money. Silas had told her he knew that. Clara had asked him what he expected her to do. And Silas had looked at her, looked her up and down, the way a man looks at a horse he is considering buying, and he had said, "We'll work something out, daughter. We always do." She had not slept properly since that day. Now, it was the morning of the first Wednesday in February, and Silas Bennett was riding into town with 3 men behind him and a folded piece of paper in his inside coat pocket. And Clara Bennett was standing in her doorway in her good gray dress with her 6 children lined up behind her, and the whole sorry business was about to come due. He did not knock. He swung down off his horse in front of the house, and he handed the reins to one of his men, and he walked up the steps and he opened the door, and he came inside without removing his hat, and Clara stood very still in the middle of her own kitchen and watched him do it. "Morning, daughter." "Mr. Bennett." He smiled at that. It was not a warm smile. He had used to insist she call him father back when Thomas was alive, and she had used to do it, and they had both understood that the word was a small humiliation she paid him in exchange for being allowed to exist in the orbit of his family. She did not pay that price anymore. "You know why I'm here?" "Yes." "You have the money." "You know I don't." He nodded. He looked around the kitchen. His eyes went to the cold stove, the empty shelves, the children huddled by the wall. They lingered on Lila May, who was 6, and on the baby, Tobias, who Caleb was holding on his hip. Tobias was 16 months old and small for his age, and he had a runny nose that Clara could not afford to do anything about. "This place is no fit home for children, Clara. It's the home they have. It's a hovel. It's the home they have." He turned and looked at her. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened. "You're going to make this difficult. I'm going to do whatever I have to do." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got, Mr. Bennett." He stood there for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and he took out the folded paper, and he opened it, and he laid it on the table. "Read it." She did not move. "Read it, Clara." She came forward. She picked up the paper. She read it. Her hand began to shake about a quarter of the way through, and by the time she got to the bottom, her whole body was trembling, and she had to set the paper back down on the table because she could not hold it steady anymore. It was a petition. It was filed with the county. It named her, and it named her children, and it asked the court, in language so dry and so legal it almost did not seem to be about human beings, to award custody and indenture of the minor Bennett children to their paternal grandfather, Silas H. Bennett, in satisfaction of outstanding debts to the Bennett family estate. The 4 older children would be apprenticed out, to whom the petition did not specify. The 2 youngest, Lila May and Tobias, would be placed with families willing to take them in exchange for canceling portions of the debt. Clara looked up at him. "You can't do this." "It's already done, daughter. Filed Monday." Judge Halverson signed off yesterday. They're my children. They're Bennett children, and they're going to be raised as Bennetts, not as paupers in a tar paper shack with a mother who can't feed them. You son of a... Careful. She had not even realized she'd taken a step toward him. She stopped. Her hands were balled into fists. Her chest was heaving. Behind her, she heard Lila May start to cry, very quietly, the way the child cried these days, like she was trying not to be heard. Silas Bennett looked past Clara at his grandchildren. There's a way to make this easier on everyone. There's no easy way. There is. He folded his hands behind his back. I've spoken to several families in town. Decent people. People who can offer these children better than this. We're going to go down to the square at noon, and we're going to settle this in the open, in front of God and witnesses, so nobody can say later that anything underhanded was done. Some of these children will go to good homes today. The rest will come back to my place, and we'll find arrangements for them by the end of the week. In the square. In the square. You want to do this in the public square? I want it done properly, Clara. I want it done in front of the town so there's no question later. So that when these children are grown and someone tells them their mother sold them, they'll know it wasn't like that. They'll know it was done lawful and open. Clara stared at him. You're going to stand me up in the town square, she said slowly, and you're going to hand my children out to whoever shows up. I'm going to find them homes. In front of everyone. Yes. Like livestock. He did not answer that. He just looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had not seen there before. Not even the day Thomas died. Not even the day he came to her kitchen in October. She saw that he was enjoying himself. Not openly, not in any way she could ever have proven, but somewhere down underneath the gray, cold face of him, the man was enjoying this. And she understood in that moment that everything Thomas had ever told her about his father had been true. And probably worse than true. She said very quietly, I'll fight you. He said, with what? And he turned around and walked out of her kitchen and got back on his horse and rode away down Mill Road toward the center of town. And Clara Bennett stood in her doorway and watched him go. And she did not move for a very long time. They walked to the square at 1:45. Clara had put the children in their best clothes, which was not saying much. Caleb in his father's old wool coat that hung down past his knees. Ruth and Lila May in the gray dresses Clara had sewn from a cut bolt of cloth last spring. Eli in a pair of denims with a patch on one knee. Mary, the oldest, who was 12, in the blue dress that had been her grandmother's, taken in twice and let down once. The baby Tobias was bundled in a wool blanket against Caleb's chest. Clara herself wore the gray dress and her wedding ring and her hair pinned up under a black bonnet. She had not been able to find her gloves. Her hands were red and chapped by the time they reached Main Street. The square was full. She had not expected that. She had told herself, walking down the hill, that maybe nobody would come. Maybe the cold would keep folks indoors. Maybe Silas would have to do his dirty work in front of 2 or 3 drunks and the sheriff. And that would be the end of it. But the square was full. There must have been 300 people standing around the bandstand, more than Clara had ever seen in Black Hollow at one time, more than turned out for the 4th of July or the harvest dance or any other occasion she could remember. Word had gotten around. She walked through them with her children behind her in a line, and the crowd parted for her, and nobody spoke, and nobody met her eyes. She saw Mrs. Halloran, who had brought her soup in November when Caleb was sick. Mrs. Halloran looked at the ground. She saw Pete Gunderson from the livery, who had let Thomas run a tab for 2 years and never once dunned him for it. Pete Gunderson looked at the sky. She saw the Reverend Peel from the Methodist Church, and he was the only one who met her eyes. And what she saw in his face was so much pity that she had to look away before she started crying right there in the snow. Silas Bennett stood on the bandstand. He had a sheet of paper in one hand and a small leather portfolio in the other. The 3 men who had ridden in with him were standing at the foot of the bandstand steps, blocking the way up. The sheriff stood off to one side, looking at his boots. "Bring them up, Clara." She did not move. "Clara, bring them up." She turned and looked at her children. They were lined up behind her in the snow, the 6 of them, and they were looking back at her with 6 different expressions and the same eyes, the same dark Bennett eyes their father had given them. And she thought, I cannot do this. I cannot make my legs walk up those steps. I would rather die in this square right here than do this thing. And then she felt a small hand take hold of hers. It was Ruth. The little girl looked up at her. Her face was white in the cold. Mama, it's okay. It's not. Mama, we have to. Clara looked down at her daughter, and she felt something break in her chest, and she squeezed the small hand once, and she turned, and she walked up the steps onto the bandstand with her 6 children in a line behind her, and the crowd of 300 people watched her do it and did not make a sound. Silas read from the paper. He read the names of the children. He read their ages. He read the amount of the debt and the interest accrued and the funeral costs and the total was $1,322.40. And he read that number out into the cold air of the square, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Then he read the names of the families who had agreed to take the children. The Pettigrews would take Mary to work in their boarding house in exchange for room and board and $3 a month, the $3 to be paid directly to the Bennett estate. The Carvers would take Caleb to work the family farm. Eli would go to a logging outfit up at Wolf Creek. Ruth would go to a widow named Mrs. Ackerman, who needed help with her chickens and her vegetable garden. Lila May and the baby Tobias were still being placed. Inquiries had been made. He read all of this out in his flat voice, and Clara stood beside him with her hands clenched at her sides, and she did not look at her children because she could not. When he was done, he folded the paper and he put it in his portfolio, and he said, "Are there any objections to be heard?" This was the part that was supposed to be a formality. This was the part where the town was supposed to nod and shuffle and go home, and the children were supposed to be led off by their new keepers, and Clara was supposed to be left standing in the empty square with the snow falling on her shoulders, and the whole thing was supposed to be over by supper time. There was a very long silence. The crowd did not move. The sheriff did not move. Silas Bennett looked out across the square with his cold gray eyes, and he waited for the silence to confirm what he had always understood about this town, and about the people in it, and about the world in general, which was that men like him got what they wanted, and the rest of the world bent its neck and looked at the snow. And then a man at the back of the crowd said, "I object." He was not from town. Clara saw him before she heard him, almost. She saw the movement at the back of the crowd, the way people stepped aside, the way heads turned. She saw a tall man in a long wolfskin coat coming forward through the snow, slow and unhurried, like a man walking into his own kitchen. He was maybe 40 years old, maybe a little more. He had a beard that was mostly black but going gray at the chin, and his face was burned dark from the wind and the sun, and there was a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down into his beard. He wore a battered hat pulled low. He carried no rifle that Clara could see, but there was a heavy revolver on his belt, worn high, the kind of rig a man wears when he means to use it. He stopped at the foot of the bandstand. "What did you say?" Silas Bennett's voice had changed. Not much, just a fraction, but Clara heard it. "I said I object." "On what grounds?" The man in the wolfskin coat looked up at the bandstand. He looked at Silas, he looked at Clara, he looked at the children lined up behind her. His eyes went from face to face, and he took his time about it, and when he got to Lila May, he stopped for a moment, and his face did something Clara could not read. Then he looked back at Silas. "On the grounds," he said, "that you're a goddamn coward." The crowd made a sound. It was not quite a gasp. It was more like the sound a horse makes when a rope goes tight around its neck. Silas Bennett's face did not change. "And who would you be?" "Name's Wade Mercer." "I don't know that name." "You wouldn't. I keep to myself." "Where do you keep to yourself, Mr. Mercer?" "Up on the Sweetgrass, north side of the Crazies." "That's a long ride from here." "It is." "Then I'll ask you to mind your business and let this town mind its own." Wade Mercer looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "How much?" "I beg your pardon? How much is the debt?" $1,322.40, but I don't see what— "I'll pay it." The square went very still. Silas Bennett blinked. It was the first time Clara had ever seen him do that in a way that meant something. It was a small thing. Most people in the crowd would not have caught it, but Clara had spent 5 years studying his face, learning his weathers, and she saw the blink and she understood that something had just gone wrong for him in a way he had not anticipated. "You'll pay it." "That's what I said." "In what?" "In gold. You have $1,300 in gold. On me." "Yes, on you." "In a saddlebag. On my horse. Down at Gunderson's livery." Silas Bennett looked at him. And in exchange for what, Mr. Mercer? Wade Mercer did not answer right away. He looked up at the bandstand again. He looked at Clara. And Clara, who had spent the last 4 months learning to read every flicker of every man's face for whatever danger it might mean, looked back at him, and she did not know what she was seeing. The man was not looking at her the way Silas Bennett looked at her. He was not looking at her the way Thomas had looked at her, either, in the good years or the bad. He was looking at her like he was sorry, like he had walked into a room where something terrible had happened, and he was the first one there, and he was sorry, and that was all. In exchange, Wade Mercer said, for the woman and her children, all of them. I'll take them off your hands. You'll take them. Yes. For what purpose? That's my business. It is very much not your business, Mr. Mercer. It is my business. These are my grandchildren. I am not selling my grandchildren to a stranger. You were about to sell them to half the town. That is an entirely different... It ain't different. It ain't different at all. You set up a price on these children, and you stood up here in front of 300 people, and you started reading off names like an auctioneer at a stock sale. And I am telling you I will pay the price and take them home and feed them, and you are telling me that is somehow worse than what you were about to do. He paused. Mr. Bennett, I want you to think real careful about what you say next, because there are 300 people standing here listening, and some of them are going to remember this day for the rest of their lives. And the words you choose right now are going to be the words they remember. Silas Bennett looked at him. Wade Mercer looked back. The wind moved through the square. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. Clara could feel her own heart beating in her throat, and she could feel Ruth's hand still gripped in hers, and she could feel her other children behind her, not breathing, not making a sound, every one of them frozen like rabbits in a field when the shadow of the hawk goes over. This is highly irregular, Silas said. It is. There would need to be papers. Draw 'em up. It would need to be lawful. Make it lawful. The children would need to consent. Ask 'em. Silas Bennett stopped. He looked down at Clara. He looked at the children. He looked back at Wade Mercer. Mr. Mercer, I do not know what kind of man you are. I do not know your business or your intentions. I am not in the habit of handing over 6 children and a young widow to a stranger in a coat made out of a wolf. I appreciate that. So if you are sincere in this offer, I am. Then you will understand that I cannot in good conscience... Mr. Bennett. Allow... Mr. Bennett. Stop. Silas stopped. Wade Mercer reached up very slowly and he took off his hat and he held it against his chest, and Clara saw that his hair was iron gray at the temples and longer than was fashionable, and she saw that his eyes were a kind of pale, tired blue, like a sky that had been washed out by too much winter. Mr. Bennett, he said, I buried my wife and my little girl 4 years ago come March. Diphtheria. They went 2 days apart. I have been alone on that ranch ever since, and I have done what a man does when he is alone with the kind of thing that I am alone with, which is mostly nothing and mostly badly. I was passing through this town today on my way home from Helena. I stopped at the livery to water my horse. Pete Gunderson told me what was happening in the square, and I came up here to see for myself because I did not believe him. And now I have seen it for myself. And I have heard you read off your numbers, and I am standing here telling you in front of these 300 people that I will pay the debt, and I will take this family home, and I will feed them and clothe them and put a roof over their heads. And I will do it not because I am a saint, and not because I am a fool, but because I have an empty house and a full pantry, and I cannot stand here and watch what you are about to do. And if you make me stand here and watch it, I will not be answerable for what happens next. He looked Silas in the eye. So you can take the money, or you can refuse the money, but you will do one or the other in the next minute in front of these people, and you will live with whichever choice you make for the rest of your natural life. The square was so quiet Clara could hear the snow falling. Silas Bennett's jaw worked. He looked down at his portfolio. He looked at his men at the foot of the steps. He looked at the sheriff, who was now looking at him for the first time, and whose expression had become very interested in the way a sheriff's expression becomes interested when he is trying to figure out which way the wind is going to blow. And then Silas Bennett did something Clara would think about for the rest of her life. He smiled. It was a small smile, a polite smile. The kind of smile a man wears at a funeral when he does not feel very much about the deceased. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I accept your offer. Bring the gold." It took an hour to make it lawful. They moved into the sheriff's office. Silas drew up the paper himself, in his cramped tight hand, and the sheriff witnessed it, and a clerk from the bank witnessed it, and Wade Mercer signed it, and Clara signed it, and Silas signed it last. Wade went down to the livery and came back with a saddlebag heavy enough that he had it slung across his shoulder with one hand braced under it, and he set it on the desk, and he opened it, and he counted out $1,322.40 in double eagles and small gold pieces, and Silas Bennett counted it again, and the sheriff counted it a third time, and then it was done. The children stood against the wall the whole hour, and they did not speak. When the last signature was dry, Silas Bennett stood up. He put on his hat. He looked at Clara for a long moment. "You'll regret this, daughter." "I doubt it." "You don't know this man." "I knew you. That was enough." The lines at the corners of his mouth tightened. He turned. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the latch, and he looked back. "This isn't over." "I know it isn't." He went out. The door shut behind him. The cold came in around the frame. Clara stood in the middle of the sheriff's office with her 6 children against the wall and Wade Mercer at the desk closing up his saddlebag, and she realized she had not eaten anything in 2 days, and that she had been standing for the better part of 3 hours, and that her knees had decided about a minute ago that they were done with the whole business. She sat down rather suddenly on a wooden chair. Wade Mercer looked up. "Ma'am, I'm all right." "You don't look all right." "I haven't eaten." He looked at her. He looked at the children. He looked at the sheriff, who was carefully studying a wanted poster on the wall and pretending he was not in the room. "When did you last eat, all of you?" The children did not answer. Mary, the oldest, said, "Yesterday, sort of." Wade Mercer was quiet for a moment. He set the saddlebag on the floor. He stood up. "All right," he said. "First thing, we are going to walk across the street to the hotel, and you are all going to eat something. After that, we are going to the mercantile, and I am going to buy you each a coat that fits and a pair of boots that don't have holes in them. After that, we are going to the livery, and I am going to hire a wagon, because my horse cannot carry 8 people, and the road to my place is a long one. And after that, we are going to go home." He paused. "My home, which I am hoping is going to start being your home too, for as long as you want it to be. I am not making any promises I can't keep, and I am not asking you to call me anything you don't want to call me. But you are going to eat tonight, and you are going to sleep warm tonight, and you are not going to be afraid in my house. Is that understood?" The children stared at him. Ruth, who had not let go of her mother's hand the entire morning, looked up at Clara. She did not say anything, she just looked. And Clara, who had been holding herself together for so many months that she could not remember what it felt like to do otherwise, looked back down at her daughter, and she felt something inside her, some thin wire that had been pulled tight for a very long time, let go. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry loudly. She had never been one for that. She just sat in the chair in the sheriff's office, and she cried the way a person cries when they have been carrying something heavy for too long, and they have finally been allowed to set it down for a minute. And Wade Mercer stood across the room from her with his hat in his hand, and he did not come any closer, and he did not try to touch her, and after a little while he said very quietly to Mary, "Go and get your mother's coat." And Mary went. They left Black Hollow at 3 in the afternoon. Wade had hired a wagon and a team from Gunderson, and he had piled the bed of it with blankets and a sack of oats and a side of bacon and a wheel of cheese and a crate of canned peaches and 4 loaves of brown bread and 2 woolen rugs and 6 new coats and 7 pairs of boots. And on top of all of it, he had set the children, one by one, with Mary holding Tobias and Caleb holding the reins of Wade's own horse, where it was tied to the back of the wagon. Clara sat on the driver's bench. Wade sat beside her. He had given her a heavy buffalo robe to put over her knees, and he had given her a tin cup of coffee from a flask he kept under the bench. And she held the cup with both hands, and she stared straight ahead down the road as the town fell away behind them, and the dark line of the crazy mountains rose up out of the white country ahead. They did not speak for a long time. The wagon creaked. The horses blew. The snow fell in slow, heavy flakes that caught in the manes of the horses and on the brim of Wade's hat and on the buffalo robe over Clara's knees. After about an hour, she said, "Mr. Mercer?" Yes, ma'am. Why did you do it? He did not answer right away. He looked out at the road ahead. The light was already starting to go. The sky over the crazies was the color of an old bruise. I don't know, he said finally. You don't know. Not in a way I could put words on. Try. He was quiet again. Then he said, I had a little girl. She would have been about the age of your littlest one. Lila, was it? Lila May. Lila May. He nodded. My girl was named Anna. She would have been 7 this past November. When I saw your littlest one standing up there on that bandstand, he stopped. He cleared his throat. I don't know, Mrs. Bennett. I don't know why I did it. I've been 4 years thinking I was done with anything that mattered, and then I walked up into that square today, and I saw what I saw, and I knew I was about to do something stupid, and I didn't see any good reason not to do it. Claire looked at him sideways from under her bonnet. You're a strange man, Mr. Mercer. Yes, ma'am. I expect I am. Don't call me ma'am. What should I call you? Clara is my name. Clara, then. And the children have names, too. I'll tell you all of them when we get out of the cold. All right? They rode on. The road turned and started up a long, slow grade toward a pass between 2 foothills. The wagon labored. Behind them in the bed, Clara could hear Ruth whispering something to Eli, and Eli whispering something back, and Tobias making the small, fussy sounds he made when he was tired but not yet ready to sleep. After a while, Wade said, Clara. Yes. That man back there. Your father-in-law. Yes? He's going to come at this from another direction. Pretty soon, probably before the snow's off the ground. I know. You know. I know him. Yes, he's not going to leave it where it is. Wade nodded slowly. He flicked the reins. The horses leaned into the grade. All right, he said. Then we got till spring, maybe less. Till spring for what? He did not answer her right away. He looked out at the dark line of the mountains and the snow coming down and the road climbing up into the long blue evening, and he said, Till he comes, whatever way he comes. We got till then to get ready. Clara looked at him. You know what you've taken on, Mr. Mercer. Wade. You know what you've taken on, Wade. He looked back at her. No, Clara, he said. I don't think I do, but I expect I'm about to find out. The wagon went over the rise. The road dropped down into the long, dark valley ahead, where somewhere, miles beyond the curtain of falling snow, a lonely ranch was waiting with cold rooms and an empty table and a dog that had not heard a child's voice in 4 years. The horses found their footing on the downgrade. The children in the wagon bed grew quiet. The light went out of the sky, and Clara Bennett, who had not slept properly in 9 months, leaned her head against the sideboard of the wagon and closed her eyes, and for the first time since her husband had gone out one morning in April and not come home, she let herself fall asleep without being afraid of what she would find when she woke up. She woke when the wagon stopped. For a moment she did not know where she was. There was a weight on her shoulders that she did not recognize and a sound in her ears that she could not place, and the air smelled of wood smoke and horses and something sharp and clean that she had not smelled in years, which was the smell of pine trees under deep snow. Then she remembered. Then she opened her eyes. It was full dark. The lantern on the side of the wagon had burned down to a low orange smudge. Wade Mercer had climbed down off the bench, and he was standing at the heads of the horses with one hand on the lead mare's bridle, talking to her in a low voice that Clara could not quite make out. The horses were blowing. Their breath came out in white clouds that caught the lantern light and faded. They had stopped in front of a house. It was a long, low building made of dark logs, set back from the track with a covered porch running the length of it. There was a barn off to the right, and what looked like a corral beyond that, all of it half buried in snow. A dog had come out from somewhere under the porch and was standing in the yard, not barking, just watching. There was a single lighted window in the house, a square of yellow against the black wall, and Clara wondered for a confused moment who had lit the lamp before she remembered that this man lived alone, that he had been gone all day, and that he must have left a lamp burning in his own kitchen before he rode down to Black Hollow that morning. Like a man who expected to come home to nobody, and had decided he was tired of coming home to the dark. Clara. She turned. Wade was looking up at her from the side of the wagon. You all right? Yes. You went to sleep. I know I did. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry." He held up a hand to help her down. She took it. His glove was rough and his grip was careful, like a man handling something he was afraid he might break. Her feet touched the snow, and her knees almost went out from under her again, and Wade caught her at the elbow and steadied her without making any fuss about it, and then he let go. "Mary." The girl sat up in the wagon bed. "Yes, sir." "Hand me the baby." Mary lifted Tobias and Wade took him, one big hand under the small, bundled body, and he held him the way a man holds a sleeping child, which is to say, carefully and a little awkwardly, like he had once known how to do it and had forgotten some of the particulars. Then he turned and walked up the porch steps and opened the door of the house, and the warm yellow light spilled out into the snow. "Come on inside," he said. "All of you, step lively. It's cold." They came inside. Clara would remember that crossing of the threshold for the rest of her life. 6 children, one after the other, half of them stumbling because their feet were numb in their old boots, all of them looking around like they had never seen the inside of a real house. And maybe they had not one with whole walls and a stove that was lit, and a floor that was clean. The room they walked into was a single long room with a kitchen at one end and a fireplace at the other, and a heavy plank table down the middle. There were shelves along one wall stacked with tinned goods and dry goods, and there was a Dutch oven sitting on the back of the stove with a lid on it, and the air in the room smelled like food, like actual food, like beans and salt pork and onions and coffee. And Clara saw Eli stop just inside the door and put a hand against the wall like the smell had made him dizzy. The dog had followed them in. It was an old dog, a brindlehound with gray around its muzzle, and it walked stiff-legged across the floor and sat down by the fireplace and watched them with milky eyes. "That's Boss," Wade said. "He's deaf as a fence post and meaner than he looks, which ain't very. He won't bite. He might lean on you." Lila May took one step toward the dog. She stopped. She looked back at her mother. "Go on, baby," Clara said. "If Mr. Mercer says he's all right." "He's all right," Wade said. "And it's Wade, please." Lila May went over to the dog, and she put a hand on his head, and the dog leaned his head against her thigh. And she did not smile, because Lila May had not really smiled at anything since the previous summer, but she stood there with her hand on the dog, and she did not move for a long time. Wade laid Tobias on the rug in front of the fire. He stood up. He looked at Clara. "There's stew on the stove, there's cornbread in the warming oven, there's coffee. There's milk in the spring house, but I didn't have time to fetch it, so it'll have to be water tonight. The little ones eat first, then the bigger ones, then us. You all sit and I'll dish it up." "I can dish it up." "You can sit." "Wade." He turned and looked at her. "I have been doing it myself for 9 months," she said. "I am not so tired I can't feed my own children." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. "All right." She ladled the stew. Her hands shook the first time she dipped the spoon, and she hoped he did not see it, but he did see it. She could tell from the way he turned his back and started cutting bread, giving her the room to be steady without anybody watching. She put a bowl in front of each child, and she put a wedge of cornbread on each bowl, and she watched her children pick up their spoons. None of them ate. They sat at the table with the food in front of them, and they looked at it, and they did not move. Mary held her spoon in her hand and stared at her bowl like she had forgotten what it was for. Caleb had both hands flat on the table on either side of his food. Eli was breathing very fast and shallow. "What's wrong?" Wade said. Nobody answered him. He looked at Clara. Clara did not know what to say. She had not seen her children look at food this way before. And then she realized she had seen this exact look on each of their faces every night for the last 4 months, except that on those nights there had been nothing in the bowls, and the looking had been a kind of pretending. They did not know how to eat in front of a full table. They had forgotten. Ruth said, very quietly, "Is it for us?" Wade went still. "All of it," he said, "every bite. And if you finish what's in your bowl, there's more on the stove. And tomorrow morning there's biscuits and bacon and eggs, and there's milk from the cow when I bring her in. And the day after that, there's whatever you want from the larder, and the day after that, the same, and on and on. Nobody at this table is going to be hungry again, not while I have anything to say about it. Do you understand me?" Ruth nodded. "Eat." She picked up her spoon. She put it in her mouth. Then they all began to eat, and they ate the way children eat. who have been hungry for a long time, which is not pretty and not polite, and not anything you would want a stranger to see. But Wade Mercer did not seem to mind. He stood at the stove and he cut more bread and he refilled the bowls without being asked, and he did not look at them while they ate, because he had the decency to understand that they did not want to be looked at. After a while, he poured himself a cup of coffee, and he sat down at the end of the table with his own bowl, and he ate slowly, and he looked at his food instead of at the children. Clara watched him do all of this, and she did not know what to make of him. She had been married for 10 years to a man she had loved, and who had loved her back, in his way. And even Thomas Bennett, at his best, had not been a man who noticed when a child needed a second helping without asking. She had grown up with a father who measured every bite that went into her mouth against the bites that went into his sons' mouths, and she had grown up understanding that this was how men were at a table, that food was a thing men handed out and women received, and the children received what the women had left over. She did not know what to do with a man who put more bread on her plate and looked away while she ate it. She did not trust it. She could not trust it. Not yet. When the bowls were empty, Wade stood up. He cleared the table. He poured water into a basin on the stove. He looked at Mary. "You're the oldest." "Yes, sir." "What's your name? I want to start getting them right." "Mary." "Mary." "And then?" He pointed at Caleb. "Caleb." "Caleb." "I'm 10. "You're a big 10. "Yes, sir." He pointed at Eli. "Eli, I'm 9. Then Ruth, who whispered her name almost into her own collar. Then Lila May, who was still by the fire with her hand on the dog. Then Tobias, asleep on the rug. "All right," Wade said. "Mary and Caleb, you'll help with the dishes tonight. Just tonight. Tomorrow you'll learn where things go. Eli, you come with me out to the barn for a minute. We got to put up the horses. Ruth, you stay with your mama. Lila May, you stay with the dog if he'll have you." Lila May nodded without speaking. Eli looked at his mother. Clara nodded. Eli got up and put on his new coat and followed Wade out the door. The cold came in for a second and then was gone. Mary stood up to do the dishes. Clara stood up too. "Sit down, Mama." "Mary." "Mama, sit." Clara sat. She watched her oldest daughter, who was 12 years old and had not been 12 years old for a very long time, scrape the bowls into a slop bucket and stack them in the basin and pour hot water over them from the kettle. Caleb stood beside her with a dish towel. They did not speak to each other. They had a way of working together that had grown up in a house with no money and no man, and a mother who could not always get out of bed in the mornings. And Clara watched it, and her chest hurt, and she did not know if it was love or shame or both. After a while, Mary said, without turning around, "Mama." "Yes, baby." "What's going to happen to us here?" Clara did not answer right away. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know what's going to happen." "Is he going to keep us?" "He says he is." "For how long?" "For as long as we need to be kept, I expect." Mary scrubbed at a bowl. Her shoulders were very thin under her dress. "Mama, is he going to want something?" "What do you mean?" "From you. Is he going to want something from you?" Clara closed her eyes for a moment. "I don't know, Mary. Because if he does— Oh, Mary! If he does, Mama, we'll figure something out. I can work. I'm 12. The Pettigrews said $3 a month, and I bet I can get more than that somewhere." "Mary, stop." Her daughter stopped. She did not turn around. Her hand stayed in the dishwater. "You are not going to work to keep me from anything," Clara said. "Do you hear me? You are going to be 12 years old this winter, and you are going to be 13 years old next winter, and you are not going to be doing for me. That is not how this goes." "Mama? Mary, look at me." Mary turned around. Her face was wet from steam and other things. Caleb was very carefully drying the same plate he had already dried. "I do not know that man out in the barn," Clara said. "I will tell you the truth. I do not know what he is. But I know he could have left us in that square today, and he didn't. And I know there's hot stew in our bellies tonight that wasn't there yesterday. And I know your brother is alive because the doctor came in November, and the doctor cost money I didn't have. And your grandfather paid for the doctor and put it on the bill, and that bill is now paid in full by a man who never met us before today. So I am not going to sit here tonight and tell you he is a saint, and I am not going to tell you he is a danger. I'm going to tell you we are going to wait and watch and see. And if anything is not right in this house, you are going to come to me and you are going to tell me. and we will deal with it, together. Do you understand me? Mary nodded. Caleb nodded too, even though he had been pretending not to listen. Good, Clara said. Now finish your dishes. The door opened. Wade and Eli came back in. Eli's face was bright red from the cold, and he was carrying an armload of split firewood that was almost as big as he was, and his eyes were lit up like nothing Clara had seen in him since before his father died. Mama, Eli said, he has 11 horses. 8, Wade said. 3 of those are ponies. They're horses. They're ponies. They're horses, Mama. And he has a cow and 2 pigs and chickens, and there's a hayloft, and the hayloft has a window in it, and you can see all the way down the valley. Is that so? Yes, ma'am. In the dark. Well, you can in the morning. All right. He set the firewood down by the stove. Wade pointed at it. He carried that himself, every stick. I know he did. He's strong. He gets it from his father. She said it without thinking, and the room went a little quiet, and Wade nodded once and did not say anything to that, and Clara was grateful for it. After that, the evening went the way evenings go in houses where there are too many children and not enough beds. Wade brought down quilts from a cedar chest in the back room. He set up a pallet for the boys by the fire and a pallet for the girls on the rug, and he gave Clara the small room at the back of the house, which had a real bed in it and a window that looked north toward the mountains. He told her it had been a guest room, once. He did not say who the guest had been. Where will you sleep? Clara said. The big room, by the front door. I usually sleep out there anyway when there's weather. That's your bed? It was. Now it's yours. It's not a thing to argue about, Clara. I have already won the argument in my head, and I would appreciate it if you didn't make me argue it twice. She looked at him. All right, she said. All right. Thank you. Don't. Wade. Don't thank me, Clara, please. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. It isn't a thing you should be thanking somebody for. It's just a thing somebody should have done a long time ago. He looked down at the floor when he said that. He did not look up again for a moment. Then he said good night, and he went out into the front room and he shut the door behind him, and Clara stood in the small bedroom by the window with the snow still falling outside and the lamp burning on the bedside table, and she did not move for a long time. She did not sleep that night, not really. She lay in the bed with her clothes still on top of the covers, in case she needed to get up fast. She listened. She heard her children breathing in the front room. She heard the dog moving around. She heard the fire shift and settle in the stove. She heard, once, around 2 a.m, Wade Mercer get up and walk softly across the front room and crack open the door to the bedroom and look in, just for a second, and then close it again and go back to wherever he had been sitting. He had not been sleeping either. She closed her eyes after that, and she did sleep, a little. In the morning, she got up before any of them. The fire in the kitchen stove was already burning. There was coffee on. Wade was sitting at the table with his hands wrapped around a tin cup, looking out the window at the gray dawn. He had a piece of paper in front of him and a pencil in his hand, and he was making a list. He looked up when she came in. Morning. Morning. Coffee's hot. She poured herself a cup. She sat down across from him. He turned the paper around so she could read it. It was a list of names, her children's names. Next to each name was an age, and next to each age was a column of items: boots, coat, shirts, trousers or dresses, stockings, mittens, hat. What is this? It's what we're going to Helena for next week. Wade. I should have bought more yesterday. I didn't. I wasn't thinking past the day. Today I am thinking past the day. And what I am thinking is that those children need clothes that fit them, and tools to do work with, and books, if we're going to talk about school. And a doctor needs to look at the little one because that cough he had last night was not nothing. He has a cough. He has a cough. You didn't hear it. I didn't. You were asleep. I was not. You were asleep for an hour. Around 3. I heard you stop breathing rough and start breathing steady. It's all right. You needed it. She looked at him. You sat up listening. I sat up because I had things to think about. Wade. Clara, I am not... Please, I am not making any kind of point. I am not trying to be a particular kind of man for you. I just had things to think about and I sat up. That is all. Drink your coffee. She drank her coffee. It was very strong, and very hot, and she had not had real coffee in 3 weeks. She closed her eyes for a moment. You said school. I did. For which ones? All of them that are old enough. Mary, Caleb, Eli, Ruth. There's a one-room school down at the crossing, 6 miles. Mrs. Hattie Devereaux runs it. She's a hard old woman, but she's a good teacher. They'd be 3 days a week to start. Other days they're here, working. They've never been to school. I know. How did you know? Mary held her spoon wrong last night. I don't mean she ate ugly. I mean she held it like a child who's never been told how. And a child who's never been told how at 12 has not been in a schoolroom. Your husband. He stopped. He picked his words. Your husband was not the kind of man who valued that, maybe. Clara felt her face go hot. Thomas couldn't read. I gathered. He was ashamed of it. Most men are. He didn't want the children to know. They know, Clara. They do. Children always know. That doesn't mean they think less of him. It means they grew up around a thing he was ashamed of, and they learned the shape of his shame, and they wear it themselves now. The school will help with that. Mrs. Devereaux won't ask them anything they can't answer. She'll start where they are. Clara sat with her coffee, and she looked at this man across her table, across his own table, that he had given to her, that he had set with her food the night before. And she did not know what to say to him. Wade? Yes. Why are you doing this? I told you yesterday. You told me you had a wife and a girl, and they died. That is not why a man pays $1,300 for a stranger and her children. He set down his cup. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the surface of the table. It's not why, he said, but it's some of why. And the rest of why I don't know. I am not a clever man, Clara. I am a man who lives alone and runs cattle and does not say much. I am not going to be able to give you a fine reason. What I can tell you is what I told your father-in-law in the square, which is that I have an empty house and a full pantry, and I am not going to be the man who watched what was about to happen and did nothing. That is what I can tell you. The rest of it I don't have words for. And what do you want from us? He looked up. Nothing. Wade, everybody wants something. Then I want company at the table. I want noise in the house. I want a girl to call that dog by his name so he isn't the only thing on this place that's lonesome. I want the boys to learn to ride and brand and pull a calf and read a book. I want you to sleep through a whole night, eventually, without sitting up listening for the door. That is what I want. If those are things you can stand to give me, then I am paid back many times over for what I spent yesterday. If they ain't, then I'm still paid back because I will know I did the thing I should have done. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, You did not pay yesterday. You did not pay for us. Clara. Wade. You did not pay. He took the money. He had no right to it. He had no right to my children. The court would have said he did. But you and I know what is right, and what is right is that you did not buy a family. You bought a man out of doing something cruel. That is what you paid for. Not us. Not me. He looked at her. She had not meant to say all of that. It had come out of her without her choosing it. She felt her face burn again, and she put her cup down. All right, Wade said quietly. All right. I take your meaning. Good. I won't say it the wrong way again. Thank you. He nodded. He pushed back from the table. The light through the kitchen window was getting stronger now, a thin gray that was almost blue, the sun somewhere behind the eastern ridge starting to push at the edges of the morning. Wake them, he said. Tell them breakfast in an hour. There's a barn to learn. He went out into the yard with his hat on and his coat on and the dog at his heels, and Clara stood at the window with her coffee and watched him cross the snow toward the barn. He walked the way a tired man walks when he has decided not to be tired anymore. He stopped halfway to the barn, and he turned and he looked back at the house, and she stepped back from the window before he could see her, and she did not know why she did that, but she did. The week that followed was the longest week of her life, and also the shortest. The children learned where things were. Mary learned to bake bread in the iron stove, and Caleb learned to muck a stall, and Eli learned to feed chickens without losing fingers. Ruth followed Wade everywhere with the dog at her side, neither of them speaking, both of them watching. Lila May sat by the fire and did not speak at all, which was nothing new. She had not spoken since August, but she let Wade put a blanket around her shoulders in the evenings, and she did not flinch when he passed close to her chair, which was new. The baby Tobias was seen by a doctor from the crossing on the third day. The doctor said he was small for his age and underfed, but the cough was not the start of anything bad. He gave Clara a bottle of dark syrup and told her to feed the boy butter. Wade paid him in coin out of his vest pocket and did not look at the price. On the fourth night, Clara found Wade sitting on the porch in the cold. He had a cup in his hand and there was a bottle on the boards beside him, and he was looking out at the snow and the dark line of the mountains, and he was not drinking, just holding the cup. She came out and stood beside him and pulled her shawl around her. "You ought to come inside." "In a minute." "You'll freeze." "I know how cold I am." She looked at the bottle. "Is that a regular thing?" "No, it is not, and it is not going to be." "All right." He turned the cup in his hand. "I sat down out here because I was tired. I brought the bottle out with me because I forgot I had it in my coat pocket. I have not poured any of it, and I am not going to. I just wanted you to know that, in case you came out and saw it." "I appreciate you telling me." "I figured you would." She sat down on the bench beside him. They sat for a while. "There was a rider," he said. "What?" "Late this afternoon, up on the South Ridge, came up to the line and sat there looking at the place for the better part of an hour. Then he turned and rode back down the trace." Clara felt the cold go into her chest. "You think it was one of his." "I know it was one of his. I knew the horse." "Which horse?" "A big bay your father-in-law's man Cathcart rides. I have seen it in Helena. There is not another like it in this country." She closed her hand on the front of her shawl. "Already." "Already?" "Wade." "I told you in the wagon. We had till spring, maybe. Maybe less." "It is going to be less." "What is he going to do?" "I do not know yet. He is going to come at it sideways. He is the kind of man who comes at things sideways. He is going to find a piece of paper or a piece of law or a piece of a man in town that he can lean on, and he is going to lean on it until something gives. We have to get ahead of him." "How?" He looked at her. "I do not know yet." "That is not very comforting." "I'm not a comforting man, Clara. I'm trying very hard not to lie to you. I would rather not give you comfort than give you a comfort that breaks under your hand the first time you set it down." She looked at him. "All right," she said. "Then we will not be comforted. We will be ready." "Yes." "Tell me what to do." "I do not know yet." "Then tell me when you do know." "I will." She nodded. She got up. She stood for a moment with her hand on the porch rail, and she looked out at the mountains, where the moon had come up and laid a long, thin line of silver along the highest ridge, and she thought about her father-in-law somewhere down in the valley, sitting at his own table writing his own list of names, and she thought she was not afraid. Not yet, but she would be afraid soon, and she thought it would be all right to be afraid as long as she did not let it stop her from doing what needed doing. She went inside. Wade sat on the porch a while longer. The bottle stayed where it was. When he came in finally, he passed it to her without a word, and she put it on the high shelf above the stove, and neither of them mentioned it again. The paper came on a Tuesday. It was the 15th day they had been on the ranch, and the snow had stopped the day before, and the sky that morning was the kind of hard blue you only get in Montana in February, the kind that makes you think the cold is over when in fact the cold is just getting started. Wade had ridden down to the crossing at first light to fetch the mail and a sack of coffee, and Clara had stayed at the house with the children and started teaching Mary how to render lard. She was elbow deep in a pot of hot fat when she heard the dog set up out in the yard, and then she heard the hoofbeats, and she knew before she got to the window that it was not Wade coming back. It was a young man on a thin gray horse. He had a leather satchel slung across his chest and a brass star pinned to his coat that caught the sun, and he had pulled up at the foot of the porch and was looking at the house with the expression of a man who has been told to do something he does not want to do. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She went to the door. "Help you." "Ma'am, are you Clara Bennett?" "I am." "Ma'am, I have a paper for you." "What kind of paper?" The young man looked down at his saddlebag. He looked up again. He looked very young indeed, not more than 20, and his nose was red from the cold, and his hands inside, their gloves were shaking a little, and Clara understood that he had been hoping Wade Mercer would be the one to answer the door. "Ma'am, I am Deputy Whitlock from the Lewis County Sheriff's Office. I have a summons here for you and for one Wade Mercer to appear in the matter of—" He was reading from the front of a folded envelope now. "In the matter of the custody and guardianship of the minor children of the late Thomas Bennett. The hearing to be held in the county courthouse in Black Hollow on the 4th day of March in the year—" "That's 3 weeks." "Yes, ma'am." 3 weeks." "Yes, ma'am." She took the envelope. She did not open it on the porch. The young deputy sat his horse and watched her, and she watched him back, and after a moment he touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, I am not the one bringing the action. I want you to know that. I am just the one carrying the paper." "I know who's bringing the action, deputy." "Yes, ma'am." "You go on back. Tell whoever asks that I took it. Tell them I will read it, and that Mr. Mercer will read it, and we will be in court on the 4th. "Yes, ma'am." He turned his horse. He rode away down the track at a trot, and the dog boss watched him go from the porch and did not move. And Clara stood with the envelope in her hand and felt the cold come up through the soles of her shoes. She read it in the kitchen with Mary at her elbow and the lard burning quietly on the stove. She read it twice. The second time her hands shook so badly that Mary took the paper from her and finished reading it aloud, slowly, stumbling on the long words. And what the long words said was that Silas H. Bennett of Black Hollow had filed a petition with the district court alleging that one Clara M. Bennett, widow, had abandoned the moral custody of her 6 minor children by removing them without legal authority to the household of a stranger of unknown character and unproven means, the said stranger being one Wade T. Mercer, and that the petitioner sought emergency restoration of guardianship pending a full hearing on the merits, and that the court had granted a hearing for the 4th day of March, and that until the hearing, both parties were enjoined from removing the children from the territory. Mary set the paper down on the table. "What does it mean, Mama?" "It means he's coming." "What does the court do?" "The court is going to listen to him, and they're going to listen to us, and then they're going to decide." "Decide what?" "Where you all live." Mary was quiet for a moment. "Mama, can he do that? Can he just write a paper and the court will listen?" "Yes, baby, he can." "Why?" "Because he has money, and because the judge is his friend." "That doesn't seem right." "It's not, but it's how it works." Wade came in at noon. He came in with his coat unbuttoned and his hat pushed back and a sack of coffee under one arm, and he was in the middle of saying something cheerful about the road being clear all the way to the crossing when he saw Clara's face and stopped. "What?" She handed him the paper. He stood by the stove and read it. He took his time. He read it twice, the same as her, and when he was done he folded it carefully along the original creases and he laid it on the table next to the coffee sack, and he stood there for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then he said, All right. This is what he's got. We can work with this. Wade, he is asking the court to take them away." "I know." "He is asking the court to declare me unfit." "I know." "He is going to bring up things, Wade. He is going to bring up Caleb being sick last winter and the doctor's bill, and he is going to bring up that I let the wood get low in December and the children slept in coats for a week. He is going to bring up Thomas, what kind of man Thomas was. He is going to—" "Clara." She stopped. He was looking at her. His face was steady, not calm exactly, steady. "I know what he is going to bring up," Wade said. "I have been thinking about it since the day we left town. I have been waiting for this paper, or one like it. The only thing I did not know was what shape it would take. And now I know, and now we can think." "Think about what?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to ride down to the crossing tomorrow and see a lawyer. There's a lawyer at the crossing. His name is Henley. He is not a young man, and he is not a brilliant man, but he is honest, which in this country is rarer than the other two. I want to ride down and see him, and I want to lay all of this in front of him and ask him what we can do. All right? There is one thing he is going to say to me, Clara, and I want to talk to you about it before he says it, so that you have time to think about it. And I want you to know up front that I am not asking you for anything, and I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what a lawyer is going to tell us when we go and see him, and then I am going to leave the room and let you sit with it." She set down the spoon she had been holding without realizing she was holding it. "What thing?" He did not look at her now. He looked at the table. "He is going to say that the best legal answer to a petition like this one is a marriage." The kitchen was very quiet. Mary had gone out to the porch to draw water, and Lila May was asleep on the rug, and Tobias was in his basket, and the boys were in the barn with the chickens, and there was nobody in the room but the two of them, and Clara could hear the lard hissing on the stove, and the dog breathing by the fire, and the wind moving along the eave of the house. "A marriage," she said. "Yes. Between you and me. Yes. Wade. I told you I was going to leave the room. Don't." "All right." He stayed where he was. He kept his eyes on the table. She said, "How does a marriage answer the petition?" "Because the petition says you abandoned the moral custody by giving the children to a stranger. A husband is not a stranger. A husband is the children's legal stepfather, and the household is a lawful one, and there is no ground left for the petition to stand on. He could file something else eventually. He could try a different angle, but this particular paper goes away, and the children's grandfather has no claim. He has the claim he has on grandchildren of any other family, which is to say not much, unless the parents are dead or proved unfit. Their mother is alive. Their stepfather is willing. The court will not pull children out of a household like that. Not in this territory. Not on a debt petition. Henley will say what I just said. He will say it more carefully and with more Latin in it, but he will say the same thing." She sat down in the chair across from him. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Wade, look at me." He looked up. "This is not a thing a person should propose across a kitchen table while the lard burns. No, it is not. This is not even a proposal. No, it is not. I am sorry, Clara. Don't be sorry. I am not angry with you. I want you to understand that. I am not angry. I am trying to think, and I do not want you to think I am angry. All right. I have been married, Wade. I know. I have been married to a man I loved, and I have been married to a man who was good to me, mostly, and not good to me sometimes, and who was good to the children when he remembered to be. And I have been a widow for 9 months, and that has been a hard 9 months, and I have buried a husband I loved, and I am not done with that. I do not know if I will ever be done with that. I understand. You do. I do, Clara. You know I do." She looked at him. He was looking at his hands now. There were old scars on the knuckles and a long, thin one along the back of his right wrist that ran up under his cuff. "Wade?" "Yes. If I were to say yes to this, and I'm not saying yes, I'm asking, but if I were to say yes, what kind of marriage would it be?" He did not answer right away. "Whatever kind you wanted it to be," he said finally, "or did not want it to be. I am not, Clara, I am going to say this badly. I am not asking for a thing. I am offering a name on a paper. That is what I am offering. The bedroom you sleep in is your bedroom. The room I sleep in is my room. If a year from now, or 5 years from now, or never, you decide that you want anything different, that is a thing you would decide and I would hear and we would talk about. But not before. And not because of a piece of paper. I do not want you to think I bought you in that square. I told you I did not buy a family. I meant it. I'm not going to walk into a marriage with you and start acting like I did. Wade. Yes. What do you get? I beg your pardon. What do you get out of it? If it is a name on a paper, if it is not a marriage in any way that matters to a man, what do you get? He looked up at her. I get to keep them. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. Wade, Clara, listen to me. 2 weeks ago, I had 11 horses and an old dog and a house with 1 lamp lit in it. Now I have a kitchen full of children and a woman teaching her oldest girl to render lard at my stove and a boy in my barn who calls a pony a horse and a little girl who has not yet said 1 word to me but who put her hand on my arm yesterday when I was unloading hay and looked at me like she was deciding whether I was going to be all right. That is what I have got. And there is a man in Black Hollow who is going to try to take all of that away from me and from her and from them on the 4th of March, and I am going to do whatever the law lets me do to stop him. That is what I get. I get to keep what I have got. There is not a finer thing in this world that a man could get. She looked at him. He looked back. He did not look away. After a while, she said, I will think about it. All right? I will tell you tomorrow night. All right? Go see your lawyer. I will. She got up. She went to the stove. She pulled the pot of lard off the heat. Her hands were not shaking now. She did not know why they were not shaking. She thought maybe it was because there was something to do and a thing to decide, and decisions had always been the part of her life that she had been good at, when she had been allowed to make them. That night she did not sleep at all. She lay in the small bedroom and she watched the moon move across the square of the window, and she thought about Thomas. She thought about the day he had asked her to marry him, when they were both 19 years old and standing behind the feed store in Helena, and he had asked her like a man asking for a favor he did not expect to get. She thought about the first year of their marriage, when there had still been some money from his mother's people, and the second year when there had not been. She thought about the night Mary was born, and Thomas had cried, and she had not known he could cry. She thought about the last time she had seen him alive, riding away down Mill Road on the borrowed horse, lifting his hand once at the bend in the road without looking back. She thought about Silas Bennett in his big house in Black Hollow, with his 3 men around him and his judge in his pocket, and the paper he had already written and the papers he was writing now. She thought about Wade Mercer asleep in the front room. Or not asleep, sitting up, listening. In the morning, she got up before dawn and she put on her dress, and she went into the front room and Wade was already up, as she had known he would be, sitting at the table with his coffee. He looked at her face once and he set down the cup. "You don't have to tell me yet." "I'm going to." "Clara." "Wade. Listen." He went still. "I will marry you," she said, "on the terms you laid out. A name on a paper, separate rooms, no promises beyond the law. If a thing ever changes between us, it changes because we both decide it, slow, like grown people. Not because of any paper and not because of any debt. And if it never changes, it never changes. And we are honest about that. And we do not pretend. Are those your terms?" "Those are my terms." "Then those are mine." He nodded. He did not smile. He looked at her with a kind of careful, sober attention that she had not been looked at with in a long time. "Thank you, Clara." "Don't." "I won't." "Wade, one more thing." "All right. The children are going to be afraid when we tell them. They have just lost a father, and now they are about to have a stepfather. They are going to think this means something it does not mean. They are going to think I have decided to leave them, or that you have decided to own them, or that the world has changed under their feet again. We have to tell them right, together, today, before we go and do it." "All right. And in court, when the time comes, they have to be ready. Mary is 12. She can hear what is coming. Caleb is 10, and he can hear most of it. Eli and Ruth will do what we can. The little ones don't need to know anything except that they are safe." "All right." "Wade." "Yes. I am scared." He nodded slowly. "I know you are." "Are you?" "I am terrified, Clara." "All right. All right." They told the children that afternoon in the kitchen after the dinner dishes. Wade did most of the talking, which surprised Clara because he was not a man who used many words, and she had thought she would have to do it. But he sat down at the head of the table, and he put his big hands flat on the wood in front of him, and he looked each one of them in the eye in turn, and then he said it the way he said most things, which was plainly and without ornament. "Your grandfather has filed a paper against your mama. He is asking the court to give him custody of you. The hearing is in 3 weeks. Your mama and I have been talking about how to fight him. The best way to fight him under the law is for me and your mama to be married. So that is what we are going to do before the hearing. It is a paper marriage. It does not change anything in the house. Your mama keeps her room. I keep mine. Nobody is anybody's father except who they were before. I will be a legal stepfather, which means I can sign for things, and I can stand up in the court and say that this is my household and you live here lawful. That is all it means. It means you are safe. Do you understand?" Mary said, "You're going to marry Mama." "On paper." "Why on paper?" "Because that is how the law works. The law does not care about anything but paper, and we are going to use paper to fight him because that is what he is using to fight us. Do you understand?" Mary nodded, slowly. Caleb said, "And then he can't take us." "Then he can't take you, not on this paper. He might try another way later. We will fight that too when it comes. But this paper goes away." Eli said, "Will you be our pa?" Wade went still. He looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he said, "No, son. Your pa was your pa. Nobody is going to take that. You can call me what you want to call me. Wade is fine. Mr. Mercer is fine if it suits you better. If you ever wanted to call me something else, that would be your choice, not mine. But I'm not going to ask for it. Your pa was your pa, and he loved you, and his name is the name you carry, and that is how it is going to stay." Eli looked at him. Then he looked at his mother. Clara nodded once. The boy looked back at his plate. Ruth had not said anything the whole time. She was watching her mother. Clara reached across the table and put her hand on the girl's hand, and Ruth turned her hand over and held on. "Are you all right, baby?" Ruth nodded. "You can ask anything you want." The girl was quiet. Then she said very softly, "Is Wade going to be sad about it?" Clara opened her mouth and could not find the answer. Wade said, "Sad about what, sweetheart?" "About marrying Mama, if you didn't want to." Wade looked at her for a long moment. "Ruth," he said, "I am going to be a luckier man tomorrow than I have been in a long time. I am not sad about it. I am not. I just want you to know that whatever happens, your mama is your mama, and you are her child, and the paper does not change that. The paper makes things stronger. It does not change anything that matters. Do you understand?" Ruth nodded again. She did not let go of her mother's hand. They were married on a Thursday morning at the courthouse in the Crossing by a circuit judge named McAllister, who happened to be passing through on his way to Helena. There was no church, and no preacher, and no music. Clara wore her gray dress, and she had put a piece of black ribbon in her hair, and she had pinned to the front of her bodice a small silver brooch that had been her mother's. Wade wore a clean shirt and a black coat that had been pressed by Mary the night before, very seriously, with the iron, while Mary lectured him on standing straight. The children stood along the back wall of the judge's chambers in their new clothes, and they watched the whole thing without making a sound. The judge said the words. Wade said his part. Clara said hers. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. When the judge said the part about taking him for her husband, she said, "I do," and her hand did not shake when she signed the book, and that was the part that surprised her most. She had thought she would shake. She did not. When it was done, the judge looked at them over his glasses and said, "Well, congratulations, I suppose." "Thank you, Your Honor," Wade said. "It is none of my business, but I will say this. You two strike me as people with something on your minds besides the romance of the occasion. I hope it works out, whatever it is." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me. Go on, I've got a stage to catch." Outside on the courthouse steps, the air was cold, and the sun was very bright, and the snow on the roofs of the crossing was beginning to drip from the eaves. The children came down the steps after them, and Mary took the baby from Clara, and Caleb shook Wade's hand the way a small man shakes a bigger man's hand, very solemn, and Wade shook it back the same way. Ruth slipped her hand into Clara's. Lila Mae stood off to one side and looked at the snow. They went home. For 2 days, nothing happened. The papers had been filed. Wade had taken the marriage certificate to Henley the lawyer that same afternoon, and Henley had filed an answer to Silas Bennett's petition, and the answer had been served on Silas Bennett's lawyer in Helena, and then there was nothing to do but wait for the 4th of March. On the morning of the 3rd day, Wade came back from the crossing white in the face. Clara was on the porch shaking out a rug. She saw him riding up and she stopped shaking. He swung down off the horse without tying it, and he came up the steps 2 at a time. "What?" "He's hired Garrison." "Who?" "Garrison. Henry Garrison, out of Chicago." "I do not know that name." "You do not need to know it. Henley knows it. He has been on the train 2 days. He'll be in Black Hollow tomorrow." "Wade, slow down. Tell me what this means." He stood on the porch with his hat in his hand, and his hair stuck to his forehead from sweat and cold, and he looked at her, and she had not seen him look this way before, not once in the 3 weeks she had known him. "It means," he said, "that your father-in-law is not playing for a county judge anymore. It means he has spent a great deal of money to bring in a man who is going to come at this case in ways Henley has never seen. Henley said this man, Garrison, has never lost a guardianship case. Not one. He builds cases out of nothing. He finds things. He talks to people." "What things?" Wade did not answer right away. He said, "He will find things, Clara. I do not know what. He will find a person from Thomas's past. He will find a neighbor who saw something. He will find a doctor who treated Caleb and who can be paid to remember it a certain way. He will find me. He will look into the 4 years between when my wife and girl died and the day I walked into Black Hollow, and he will find a thing in there to make me look like whatever he wants to make me look like. I do not know what he will find, but he will find something. That is what a man like that does. She put her hand on the rail of the porch. All right, she said. All right. Then we will find things too. He looked at her. You said it yourself, Wade. You said the law does not care about anything but paper. So we will get paper. We will find every person who ever knew Thomas Bennett, and we will ask them what kind of father he was, and we will find every neighbor on Mill Road, and we will ask them what they saw of me with my children, and we will find every soul on the sweetgrass who ever sold you a sack of feed or borrowed a tool from your barn, and we will ask them what kind of man you are. We will not wait for him to come at us. We will come at him. And we will hold the children close, and we will tell them the truth, all of it, what is going to happen, and what is being said, and what they may be asked, because they are going to be asked, Wade. He is going to put my children on a stand. Wade was looking at her like he had not quite seen her before. Clara. What? I'm going to ride to Henley right now and tell him what you just said. Do that. And I'm going to ask him to write down every name we just talked about. Yes. And I want you to sit down tonight and write down everything you can remember about Thomas, about your father-in-law, about the years in that house, things he did, things he said, things he did to Thomas before Thomas grew up. I want all of it on paper before that man Garrison gets here. All right? Clara. Yes. I should have known this was coming. You did know. Not like this. No, not like this, but you knew it was coming. You said it on the porch the second night. I did. Then go. We have 18 days. Go. He went. He did not even tie the horse. He swung back up into the saddle and he rode out of the yard at a dead run, and the dog boss got up off the porch and watched him go and did not lay back down for a long time after. Clara stood on the porch with the rug in her hands. Inside the house, she could hear Mary scolding Caleb about something and Eli laughing and Tobias making the small, unhappy sound he made when he was hungry. And somewhere out by the corral, she heard a calf bawl. The first of the season, the snow already starting to think about going. She stood there a while longer with the cold sun on her face. Then she went inside and she sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and the stub of a pencil, and she began to write down what she remembered. She wrote until the lamp burned low. She wrote past supper. She wrote things she had not let herself think about in 5 years, and her hand cramped, and her eyes burned, and she did not stop, and Mary brought her a cup of coffee at midnight and set it by her elbow and did not say a word, and Clara wrote on. The pages stacked up. By the end of the first week, she had 40 of them. By the end of the second, she had 86, written in pencil on the cheap pulp paper Wade brought back in bundles from the crossing. And Henley the lawyer had ridden up to the ranch twice to read them and to ask questions and to write down names. He was a thin gray man in a black coat that had been mended at the elbow, and he sat at the kitchen table with his spectacles low on his nose, and he asked the kind of questions a doctor asks when he is trying to find out where it hurts. He did not flinch at what Clara told him. He wrote it all down. On the second visit, he closed his notebook and looked at her for a long moment over the spectacles. Mrs. Mercer, he said. He had begun calling her that. She had not yet decided whether she liked it. I want to ask you a hard question. Go on. Did Silas Bennett ever lay a hand on you? Clara did not answer right away. She had known the question was coming. She had written around it for 2 weeks. She had written about the things he said, the way he watched her at his table, the way he came into her kitchen the October after Thomas died without taking off his hat. But she had not put on paper the night in the back room of the lumber office when she had gone to ask him about a payment plan, and he had stood up behind his desk and walked around it and put his hand on the side of her face, not hard, but in the way a man puts his hand on a thing he believes he has a claim to. She had not written about how she had stood very still. She had not written about how she had said, Mr. Bennett, I am your son's widow, and how he had said, I know exactly who you are, Clara, and how he had taken his hand away and sat back down and gone on with the figures as if nothing had happened. She had not written about the way she had felt walking home in the dusk, like there were two of her, the one walking and the one watching the one walking, and the one watching had been making a list of things she would never tell anyone for the rest of her life. She told Henley about it. She told him all of it. Her voice did not shake. Henley wrote it down in his small, careful hand, and when she was done, he set his pencil down and he took off his spectacles and he rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Mercer. Yes. Will you say that in court? If I have to. You will have to. I am sorry. All right. I am very sorry. I want you to understand that I would not put you to it if I did not believe it was the thing that would turn this case. I understand. Garrison is going to come at you. He will ask why you did not report it. He will ask why you went back to that office afterward. He will ask if you have any witnesses. He will ask all of the questions men ask of women in courtrooms, and he will ask them in a way that is going to make you want to walk out the door, and you cannot walk out the door. Do you understand? I understand. You're going to be angry. Do not be angry on the stand. Anger looks like guilt in a courtroom. Anger looks like a woman who lost her temper, and Garrison will use it. You are going to be sad. Do not cry until he is done with you. If you cry, cry after, when our side is asking you the gentle questions. Do not cry on his time. All right. And one more thing. Yes, you will look at the judge when you answer. Not at Garrison, not at Silas Bennett, the judge. The judge is the only person in the room whose mind you are trying to change. Everyone else is just furniture. All right. He put his spectacles back on. He picked up his pencil. They went on. Wade came in from the barn at the tail end of that conversation. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand, and he did not say anything, but Clara saw his face, and she understood that he had heard at least some of it, and she understood from the set of his jaw that he had not heard any of it before. Not the part about the office, not the part about the hand. She had not told him. She had not known how, and she had not known whether telling him would change the way he looked at her, and she had not been willing to find out. He stood in the doorway, and he held his hat very still in both hands, and he did not look at her, and after a moment he turned and went back out into the yard. Henley watched him go. He looked at Clara. Go talk to him. Now. Now. She went out into the yard. The sun was setting behind the barn, and the light on the snow was the color of weak tea. Wade was standing at the corral with his arms folded on the top rail, looking at the horses. She came up beside him. She did not say anything for a moment. He did not turn his head. You did not tell me. No. Why? She thought about it. Because I did not want you to look at me different. I am not looking at you different. You are. A little. You will. Clara, Wade, listen. I do not mean it as a complaint. I have been looked at different my whole life by men who heard a thing about a woman and could not stop themselves from doing the math. I do not believe you are like that, but you are a man, and you are going to do some math whether you mean to or not. So I did not tell you. Now I have told you. Do whatever math you need to do, and then come back to me and we will keep going. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to kill him. Wade, I'm not saying it for show. I'm telling you, if I'm near him in a room and he opens his mouth, I'm going to kill him. You are not going to do anything of the kind. Clara, Wade, look at me. Look at me. He turned. You're going to sit in that courtroom on the 4th of March, she said, and you are going to keep your hands flat on the table and your mouth shut except when Henley tells you to open it. You are not going to give that man one thing, not one look, not one twitch, not one word he can use. Do you understand me? He wants you to lose your temper. He has hired a man from Chicago because he wants you to lose your temper in front of the judge so that he can stand up and say, see, Your Honor, see what kind of man this is. You are not going to give him that. You are going to be the steadiest man in the room. You are going to be the man I told the children you were, the night you said nobody at this table would be hungry again. That is the man who is going to sit at that table in court. Do you understand? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes. Say it. I understand. Good. She turned to go back to the house. He caught her sleeve. She stopped. He did not say anything for a moment. He let go of her sleeve and he put his hand on the rail again and he looked out at the horses. Clara? Yes. I am sorry I was not in that town 3 years ago. She did not know what to say to that. She stood there in the cold light of the dying sun and she felt something move through her that she had no name for. And after a moment, she put her hand on top of his hand on the rail, just for a second, and then she took it away. Come inside, she said. Henley is not done with us. The last week before the hearing went by in a blur. Henley brought a young man with him from the crossing, a stenographer, and they sat with each of the older children in turn, very gently, and they asked them what they remembered. They asked Mary about the winter before her father died, and about the months after, and about her grandfather. They asked Caleb about being sick in November. They asked Eli what he had seen and what he had not. They did not ask Ruth anything. Henley said Ruth would be the one called by the other side, that Garrison would smell what Ruth was, that Garrison would put her on the stand because she was 8 and quiet and easy to confuse, and that Henley would object until he was blue, but the judge was going to let it happen, because the judge was Silas Bennett's man, and Silas Bennett wanted the little girl on the stand, so they had to get Ruth ready. They could not ask her anything they might be accused of coaching, but they could sit with her in the evenings, and they could talk about what a courtroom was, and what a judge was, and what it meant to tell the truth even when the question felt like a trick. Clara did most of that work. She did it on the rug in front of the fire, with Ruth in her lap, with the dog boss sleeping at their feet. Baby, if a man asks you a question and you do not understand it, what do you say? I say I don't understand. And if he asks you the same question again with different words and you still don't understand it, I say I still don't understand. And if he gets angry with you, I look at the judge. That's right. And what do you tell the judge? I tell him the man is making me feel like I'm doing something wrong. That's right. And then the judge will help me. He should. Will he, Mama? I don't know, baby. He is not always a good man, but he has to look at you when you say it, and that will be a thing he has to think about. Okay. Are you scared? A little. Me too. You're scared, Mama. Some, yes. It would be a foolish thing not to be. Ruth had been quiet for a while. Then she had said, Mama, Wade is not going to give us back, is he? No, baby. Even if the judge says to. Clara thought about that for a long time. He would do whatever the judge said to, she said finally, because he is a man who keeps the law. That is part of why he is the man he is. But I am telling you, Ruth, the judge is not going to say to. We are going to make sure he does not say to. Do you understand? Yes. Good. On the 2nd of March, they loaded the wagon. Henley had taken rooms for them at the boarding house on the south end of Black Hollow, a place called the Antlers, run by a widow named Mrs. Coyle, who Henley said could be trusted, by which he meant she was not in Silas Bennett's pocket. They left the ranch in the dark. Wade had Caleb and Eli in the wagon bed with the trunks, and Mary on the bench with Clara, and Lila Mae and Tobias inside a nest of blankets in the back with Ruth tucked beside them. The dog boss they had left with a neighbor up the trace, a German named Lautner who had a daughter the children's age, and Boss had laid down on Lautner's porch and put his head on his paws and not looked at Wade once, which had hurt Wade more than he let on. They came into Black Hollow at dusk. The town had not changed. The cold still had teeth. The square was empty now of the people who had stood in it on the first Wednesday in February. But Clara could feel them anyway. 300 ghosts standing in the snow with their hats in their hands and their eyes on the ground. And she could not look at the bandstand as the wagon went past. And Wade saw her not look and put the team into a brisker walk and did not say anything. Mrs. Coyle gave them 3 rooms at the back of the boarding house and would not let Wade carry the trunks up the stairs himself. She had 2 grown nephews who lived above the stable, she said, and that was what they were for. She brought up a tray of hot biscuits and cold ham and a pot of beef tea for the children, and she stood for a moment in the doorway of Clara's room, and she looked at Clara and she said very quietly, I knew your husband's mother, Mrs. Mercer. She was a fine woman. She would not have stood for what is being done here. I want you to know that. Thank you. There will be folks in that courtroom tomorrow who are with you. They will not say so out loud, but they will be there. Do not forget that when you are looking out at the room. I will not. All right. She closed the door. Clara did not sleep. She sat up in the chair by the window with her hand wrapped around a cup of tea that went cold, and she went through the things she had to say in her head, one by one, the way Henley had taught her. She heard Wade walking back and forth in the next room, sometime around 3 in the morning. She heard him stop. She heard him sit down. She thought about going next door. She did not. She stayed in her chair until the sky began to gray and the first wagon clattered on the cobbles outside, and then she got up and washed her face and put on her gray dress, and pinned her mother's brooch to the bodice and went down to breakfast. The courthouse was full. She had hoped it would not be. She had hoped the cold would keep people home, but the town had not forgotten what it had failed to do on the first Wednesday in February, and the town was here now, packed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery and along the back wall and out into the hallway. And Clara walked up the aisle on Wade's arm with her 6 children behind her, and the entire room turned to look at them. And this time she made herself look back. She saw Mrs. Halloran in the 3rd row. She saw Pete Gunderson from the livery, standing against the wall with his hat in his hand. She saw the Reverend Peel sitting up front with a thick book in his lap, his face very still. She saw faces she did not know, and faces she did know, and a few faces that would not meet her eye even now. And she counted them, and she catalogued them, and she did not forget any of them. Silas Bennett was at the petitioner's table. He had on a new black suit. He did not look up when she passed. Beside him sat a man she had never seen before. He was 60 years old, maybe a little less, very thin, very upright, with white hair brushed back from a wide brow and small steel spectacles low on a nose like a hawk's. His suit was the best suit Clara had ever seen on a human being. It was the color of charcoal, and it did not have a wrinkle in it, and the collar of his shirt was so white it almost hurt to look at. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, very still, and he was watching her come up the aisle the way a man watches a deer pass through a clearing when he has a rifle in his hands and all the time in the world. That was Henry Garrison. She sat down at the respondent's table next to Wade. Henley was on her other side. Henley had on his same black coat with the mended elbow, and his spectacles were already low on his nose, and he leaned over to her and he said very quietly, "Steady. Steady. Look at the judge." All right. The judge came in. Everyone stood. Judge Halverson was a fat man in his 60s with side whiskers and a waddle, and he settled himself behind the bench with a series of small grunts, and he banged his gavel, and he had everyone sit, and he read the case off into the close, warm air of the room, and then he turned the floor over to Henry Garrison. Garrison stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not move much. He stood at the petitioner's table with his hands lightly resting on the wood, and he spoke for 15 minutes without notes. And what he laid out for the judge was a story. The story he laid out was this: that Thomas Bennett had been a weak man and a worse husband, that he had died deep in his father's debt, that his widow had been left destitute with 6 small children in a tar paper shack on the edge of town, that the children had gone hungry through the autumn and into the winter, that one of them had nearly died of fever in November, that the mother had proved herself unfit by the simple fact of those facts, that the grandfather, a man of standing and substance, had attempted to make decent arrangements for the children in February, arrangements which the petitioner would now characterize as perhaps imperfectly handled in their form, but unimpeachable in their substance, and that those arrangements had been disrupted by the sudden intrusion into the town square of one Wade T. Mercer, of whom nothing was known, of whom less was understood, a man 4 years a widower and 4 years a recluse, who had upon impulse purchased, Garrison said the word purchased and let it sit in the air for a long beat, purchased the family with a saddlebag of gold and removed them to an isolated property in the foothills of the Crazy Mountains, far from any neighbor, far from any town, far from any oversight of any kind. That a hasty and suspect marriage had been arranged for tactical reasons 3 weeks ago, and that the court should not be deceived by paperwork into ignoring what every reasonable person in the room could see for themselves, which was that 6 children had been taken by a strange man from a desperate mother in exchange for money, and were now living in his house, and that the law of the territory and the conscience of a civilized people demanded that they be returned to a proper guardian. He sat down. The room was very quiet. Henley stood. He did not stand the way Garrison had stood. He looked rumpled and old and tired, and he picked up a small stack of notes from his table and he tapped them on the wood to align them, and then he set them down and did not look at them again. "Your Honor," he said, "I am going to call a number of witnesses, with the court's permission. I am going to call a doctor and a liveryman and 4 of Mrs. Mercer's neighbors from Mill Road, and I am going to call my client Mr. Mercer, and I am going to call my client Mrs. Mercer, who is the children's mother. And I am going to call the children, beginning with the oldest. I'm going to ask them about the conditions in the home before February of this year. I'm going to ask them about the conditions in the home since February. And I am going to ask them to tell this court in their own words what they want. And I am going to ask the court to listen." He sat down. Halverson grunted. "Call your first witness, Mr. Henley." Henley called Pete Gunderson. Pete walked up to the stand with his hat in his hands, and he was sworn in, and Henley asked him about the morning of the first Wednesday in February, about who he had seen ride into town, about what he had heard. Pete told it plain. He told about Silas Bennett coming in with 3 men. He told about how Wade Mercer had ridden up to the livery a little after 11 and asked to water his horse, and how he, Pete, had said something to Wade about what was about to happen in the square, not meaning to start anything, just talking, and how Wade had asked him to repeat it twice, and had then stood for a full minute looking at his horse's neck without saying anything. He told about Wade going up to the square. He told about coming back an hour later and asking for the wagon and the team and the supplies and paying for all of it in gold. Garrison stood up. "Mr. Gunderson?" "Yes, sir." "How long have you been the liveryman in this town?" 26 years. "In those 26 years, how often has a stranger ridden into your livery and paid in gold for a wagon and a team and 3 weeks of supplies for a household of 8? Pete looked at him. "Once, sir." "Once." "Yes, sir." "In 26 years." "Yes, sir." "Thank you. No further questions." Pete looked over at Henley. Henley nodded slightly. Pete stepped down. It went on like that. Henley called the doctor, who said the boy Caleb had survived his fever through his mother's nursing and not through anything else, that he had told her so at the time, that he had refused to take her money. Garrison asked the doctor whether he had been paid for the visit by anyone else. The doctor admitted he had been paid by Silas Bennett a week later. Garrison let the admission sit. Henley called Mrs. Halloran. Mrs. Halloran cried on the stand, and she said that Clara Bennett had been the best mother on Mill Road, that she had gone without herself so the children could eat, that any neighbor on that street would say the same. Garrison did not cross-examine her. He smiled at her gently and said no questions, and Mrs. Halloran left the stand looking confused, which was, Clara realized, exactly what Garrison had wanted. Then Henley called Wade. Wade went up. He was sworn in. He sat. He looked at Henley, and not at Garrison, and not at the room. Henley asked him to tell the court, in his own words, why he had stepped forward in the square on that morning. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I saw a woman with 6 children being treated like a stock sale by a man who was supposed to be the grandfather of those children. I had $1,300 on me. I had an empty house. I decided I would rather have the money in his pocket and the children at my table than the children scattered across this county and the money still in my saddlebag. And what have you done since taking the family home, Mr. Mercer? I have fed them 3 meals a day. I have put boots on their feet and coats on their backs. I have sent the 4 older ones to school 3 days a week. I have taught the boys to muck a stall and feed a horse and split a stick of wood. I have not laid a hand on any of them. I have not laid a hand on their mother. We are married on paper for the purpose of fighting this case. That is the long and the short of it. Thank you, Mr. Mercer." Henley sat down. Garrison stood up. He walked very slowly to the front of the room. He did not approach the witness stand. He stood about 10 feet away from Wade, and he looked at him for a long moment without speaking, and the room got very quiet. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes, sir?" "Where were you on the night of October the 11th, 4 years ago?" Wade went still. Clara felt Henley stiffen beside her. Wade said, "I was at my ranch with my wife and my daughter." "And what happened on that night, Mr. Mercer?" "My wife died. She died of diphtheria." "Yes, sir." "And 2 days later, your daughter died of the same." "Yes, sir." "And in the 4 years between that night and the day you walked into Black Hollow, Mr. Mercer, tell the court, did you go to town? Did you take meals with people? Did you attend services? Did you attend dances? Did you call on neighbors? Did you do any of the things that men do?" Wade looked at him. "No, sir," he said. "I did not do most of those things." "You drank, did you not?" Wade's jaw worked. "For a time, yes." Heavily. "For a time, yes, sir." "Were you arrested in Helena in the spring 2 years ago, Mr. Mercer, for an altercation in a public house?" "Yes, sir." "You were drunk?" "Yes, sir." "You struck a man?" "He had said a thing about my wife I would not let him say." You struck him hard enough that he was attended by a doctor. Yes, sir. You spent 2 nights in the Helena jail. Yes, sir. And the man you struck, he was paid off. He did not press the charge. He was paid off. Yes, sir. By whom? Wade was quiet. By me, sir. How much did you pay him? $40. $40 to keep a violent assault out of the public record. Henley was on his feet. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Henley. Henley sat, slowly. Clara could see his jaw working. Garrison turned very slowly and looked at the gallery. Mr. Mercer, you are a man who, by your own testimony, spent 4 years in a state of grief so profound that you removed yourself from human society. You are a man who, by your own admission, drank heavily during that period. You are a man who, by the record of the Helena Police Department, engaged in violence on at least one documented occasion. You are a man who, by your own statement just made under oath, paid $40 to a private citizen to keep a violent incident out of the public courts. And you are asking this court to believe that 3 weeks ago, you walked into a public square in Black Hollow and on the strength of pure and disinterested charity, paid $1,300 to take possession of a woman and her 6 children. Is that what you are asking the court to believe? Wade looked at him. His hands were flat on the rail of the witness stand. Clara could see his knuckles. They were white. She could see the small muscle in his jaw, the one she had learned to watch for. She thought about what she had said to him at the corral. You are going to keep your hands flat on the table and your mouth shut except when Henley tells you to open it. He did not look at her. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, he said, I have done all those things the gentleman said. I am not a perfect man. I do not claim to be one. I drank for a year after my family died, and I did not eat right, and I did not see anybody. And one night in Helena, I hit a man who said a thing he had no business saying about a woman who could not defend herself anymore. I have not had a drink since the day before I walked into Black Hollow. I have not raised my hand to a living soul in 3 years. I'm a rough man, and I have been a worse man than I am now, and I will not stand here and pretend any of that did not happen. What I will say is this. There are 6 children in that gallery behind me, and a woman, and they are eating 3 meals a day in my kitchen, and the boys are learning to read at the school down at the crossing, and the little one who could not lift his head when I first saw him is putting on weight. And there is not one person in this courtroom, not the petitioner and not his lawyer and not your Honor, who can stand up and say that those children were better off the night before I walked into that square than they are tonight. That is what I will say. Make of it what you will. Garrison watched him for a long moment. Then he turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Wade stepped down. The room was very still. Halverson looked at the clock on the back wall. He grunted. We will adjourn for an hour. The petitioner's counsel may begin his case in chief at 1 o'clock. He banged the gavel. He got up. The room rose. Wade came back to the table. He did not sit down. He stood behind his chair with his hands on the back of it, and Clara saw that his hands were shaking now, just a little, the tremor that comes after a thing and not during it. She put her hand on his wrist, in front of the whole room, and she did not care who saw it. You did well. I did not do well. Wade, you did well. He did not get what he wanted. He got plenty of what he wanted. He did not get you. He wanted you. He did not get you. You sat there and you told the judge the truth, and you kept your hands on the rail. He did not get you. Wade looked down at her. All right, he said. All right. Henley was on his feet already, gathering papers, his face set. We have an hour. I need 10 minutes with the children. Then I need 10 minutes with you, Mrs. Mercer. The rest is going to be on the stand. She nodded. She did not look across the room at Silas Bennett. She did not look at Henry Garrison. She looked at her children in the gallery, at Mary holding the baby, and Caleb with his arm around Eli and Ruth, sitting very small between them, with her hands folded in her lap like an old woman. And she thought, steady, 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 just a few hours more, just a few hours. You can be steady for a few hours. And she turned to follow Henley out of the room. The hour passed, and the room filled again, and Garrison began to call his witnesses. He called the doctor again, on a narrow point. He called a clerk from the lumber office who had no real testimony to give and seemed embarrassed to be there. And then, just as Clara had known he would, he called Ruth Bennett to the stand. Henley stood up. He objected on every ground he had. He objected on the age of the child. He objected on the trauma of the proceeding. He objected on relevance. Halverson overruled all of it. Ruth walked up the aisle in her gray dress with her hair pinned back and her hands clasped in front of her, and she climbed up onto the witness chair, and her feet did not reach the floor. The bailiff swore her in. She looked at Clara once. Clara nodded. Ruth looked back at Garrison. Garrison crouched down so that his face was on a level with hers. It was a practiced thing. Clara saw it and hated him for it. "Hello, sweetheart. My name is Mr. Garrison. I am going to ask you some questions, all right?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know why we are here today, Ruth?" "Yes, sir." "Tell me why we are here." "My grandfather wants to take me and my brothers and sisters away from my mama." The room went very still. Garrison did not show anything on his face. He did not flicker. "Ruth, do you live now with a man named Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, sir. He is my mama's husband." "And before you lived with Mr. Mercer, you lived with your mama in a small house on Mill Road. Is that right?" "Yes, sir." "And in that house, sometimes you did not have enough to eat. Is that right?" "Yes, sir." "And in that house, sometimes it was very cold." "Yes, sir." "And your mama was sad a lot of the time, was she not?" "Yes, sir." "Ruth, did your mama ever cry?" "Yes, sir." "Many times?" "Yes, sir." "And in Mr. Mercer's house, is it warm?" "Yes, sir." "And is there enough to eat?" "Yes, sir." "And so, sweetheart, if you had a choice between a place that was warm and had food and a place that was cold and did not, which would you choose?" Ruth was quiet. She looked at her hands. Then she looked up at the judge, the way her mother had taught her, and she said, "Sir, the man is asking me a trick question." Halverson blinked. He sat forward in his chair. "How do you mean, child?" "He is asking me would I rather be warm or cold, but that is not what the question is really about. The question is really about would I rather be with my mama or with my grandfather, and he is not asking me that one because he knows what I will say." The room did not breathe. Garrison opened his mouth. He closed it again. Halverson said very quietly, "Child, what would you say if a man asked you that question?" Ruth looked at the judge. "Sir," she said, "my grandfather is a bad man. He hurt my papa when my papa was little. My papa told me. My papa said his father used to lock him in the corn crib in the dark when he was bad, for a whole day and a whole night. My papa said he could not breathe sometimes in there. My papa said he never wanted his children to know a man like that. My papa is dead now. He cannot keep us from him. But my mama can, and Mr. Mercer can, and they are. And I do not want to go anywhere else. Not ever, sir." The silence held. Garrison did not move. He was still crouched. He stood up slowly like an old man, and he turned away from the witness chair, and he walked back to his table without looking at anyone, and he sat down. Halverson cleared his throat. "You may step down, child." Ruth climbed down off the chair. She walked back down the aisle, and she came to her mother, and she put her hand into Clara's hand, and she sat down beside her, and she did not look up. Henley stood. His voice was thick. "Your Honor, the respondent calls Clara Mercer." Clara stood. Her legs were steady. She was surprised by that. She walked up the aisle, and she was sworn in, and she sat down in the chair Ruth had just left, and she looked at the judge, the way Henley had told her. Henley asked her 3 questions. He asked her about the house on Mill Road, and she told him about it. He asked her about the morning in the square. She told him about that too. And then he asked her about Silas Bennett and what kind of man he was. And she told the courtroom about the night in the back office of the lumber company. And she told it the way she had told Henley 2 weeks before, plain and unhurried, and her voice did not shake. When she was done, Henley sat down. Garrison stood. He stood very slowly. He looked at her. She looked back at the judge. "Mrs. Mercer." "Yes, sir." "You waited 2 weeks ago to put that story on paper." "Yes, sir." "You did not report it to the sheriff at the time." "No, sir." "You did not tell your husband." "My husband was dead, sir." "I beg your pardon. You did not tell Mr. Mercer until 2 weeks ago." "No, sir." "You did not tell anyone, in fact, until you found yourself in a courtroom where saying it would be useful to you. Sir? Yes. She looked at the judge. Sir, I have not said this thing for 5 years because I did not believe anyone in this town would do anything about it if I did. The man who would have stood up for me was his son, and his son could not stand up to him, and I learned that early. The sheriff in this county draws his salary from a board that the petitioner sits on. The judge before you was put on the bench by money that the petitioner raised. I'm not saying this to offend the court. I'm saying it because the gentleman asked me why I did not report it. And the answer is that I am not a stupid woman, sir, and I knew the shape of this town. I am saying it now because my children are in this room and because there is a man beside me who will not let what happened to me happen to anyone else. And because I will not spend the rest of my life eating a thing I should have spat out a long time ago. That is why I did not tell. And that is why I am telling now. Garrison stood very still. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the judge. No further questions. Halverson looked at him. He looked at Henley. He looked out at the room. This court will recess until tomorrow morning at 9. I will render my decision then. He banged the gavel, and he stood, and he went out, and he did not look at Silas Bennet. And Silas Bennet saw him not look, and Clara saw Silas Bennet's face change, just a fraction, just a small tightening at the corners of the mouth. And she knew then. She knew it in her chest before she could have said why. That night at the boarding house, Wade did not eat. He sat at the table with his hands on either side of his plate, and he did not touch the food, and after a while he got up and went out to the porch. Clara found him there an hour later, on the bench with his hat in his hands. The night was cold and still, and the stars were out hard the way they get in Montana in March. She sat down beside him. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, I should have told you about him before. I know why you didn't. It was not because I did not trust you. I know. I just did not have the words yet. I know, Clara. They sat. After a while she said, You did a thing today that not many men can do. What thing? You let a child save you. You sat there and you let Ruth save you. That is a hard thing for a man. He did not answer. She reached over and she put her hand on top of his hand, and this time she did not take it away. Wade. Yes. Whatever the judge says tomorrow. Yes. We are going home together, all of us. If he says yes, we ride out at noon. If he says no, we still ride out at noon. He is not going to take them. I want you to understand that. Whatever he says with his mouth, he is not going to take them. I will go on foot up the trace with my children behind me if I have to. You will not. You will stay and you will fight him in another court. We will not lose them. Either way. Clara. Either way. He looked at her. All right. All right. In the morning, the courtroom was full again. Halverson came in. Everyone stood. Halverson sat down, and he did not bang the gavel right away. He took off his spectacles and he polished them with a corner of his handkerchief, and he put them back on, and he looked out at the room for a long moment, and then he picked up a single piece of paper from the bench. In the matter of the petition of Silas H. Bennet. He paused. This court has heard the testimony. This court has weighed the evidence. This court has, in the course of its long career, sat through many petitions of this nature, and it has, at times, ruled in ways that, on reflection, it would not rule again. It has occurred to this court, in the small hours of this morning, that it has come to the end of its career on the bench, and that a man at the end of his career may sometimes find himself with a clearer view of his own conduct than he has previously enjoyed. The room did not move. This court finds that the petition is denied in its entirety. The court further finds that the marriage of Wade T. Mercer and Clara M. Mercer is lawful and binding, that the household established by them is fit and proper for the rearing of the minor Bennett children, and that the petitioner has demonstrated no legal interest in those children sufficient to disturb that arrangement. The petitioner is hereby barred from initiating further actions of this kind in this county for a period of 5 years. The court further notes, on its own motion and for the record, that certain testimony given in these proceedings concerning the conduct of the petitioner toward the respondent in October of the year past has raised matters which this court believes warrant the attention of the territorial authorities, and the court will be referring the transcript of that testimony to that office accordingly. He set the paper down. He looked at Silas Bennet. Sir, he said, I have known you a long time. I will not pretend that I have not. I will say that I have not known you as well as I thought, and that I am ashamed of some part of that. You are dismissed." He banged the gavel. The room exploded. People stood. People shouted. Mrs. Halloran in the third row was crying. The Reverend Peel stood up with his book against his chest, and he looked at Clara, and he did not say anything, but his face was wet. Pete Gunderson from the livery walked across the room with his hat in his hand, and he stopped at the table and he put his hand on Wade's shoulder, just for a second, and then he walked out without a word. Silas Bennett sat at the petitioner's table for a long time. He did not move. Henry Garrison stood up. He gathered his papers. He spoke briefly to Silas, and Silas did not look up at him, and Garrison left through the side door without ever looking back at the room. After a while, Silas Bennett stood up too. He did not look at Clara. He walked down the aisle alone, and the people in the aisle did not move aside for him quickly, and he had to push through them, and he went out the front door of the courthouse and down the steps, and he was never seen in Black Hollow again. They heard later that he sold the lumber mill in May. They heard he went east to a brother in St. Louis. They heard a great many things. They did not in time hear his name often, and then they did not hear it at all. They rode home that afternoon. The thaw had come. The road was muddy, and the snow on the south slopes was going fast, and there were patches of brown grass beginning to show along the fence lines, and somewhere up in the cottonwoods a magpie was calling. The children rode in the wagon bed in the sun with their coats off for the first time in months. Lila May sat beside Ruth, and she did not speak, but she was looking at things, looking at the country going past, and Clara saw it and held it in her chest like a small, warm coal. The seasons turned. The spring came in hard and fast, the way it does in that country, and the calves dropped, and the boys learned to pull a stuck one, and the older girls learned to keep a kitchen running for 8. The summer was long and hot, and they put up hay for 2 weeks straight, and Wade taught Eli to drive a team, and Eli stood up on the rake seat the first time and yelled at the horses the way he had heard Wade do it, and Wade laughed for the first time in anybody's memory of him, a real laugh, surprised out of him. The fall they shipped cattle for the first time in 5 years off the Mercer Ranch. The winter the snow came and they sat by the fire in the long room, and Mary read out loud from a book she had borrowed from Mrs. Devereaux at the school, and Caleb whittled, and the dog boss lay on the rug, and Tobias, who was walking now and saying up, climbed into Wade's lap without asking and went to sleep there. It was the next spring, almost a year to the day after the hearing, that Lila May spoke. She was on the porch. Wade was on the step below her, mending a piece of harness. She had come out and sat down without him noticing. She watched him work for a long time. Then she reached out and she put her small hand on his hand, the way she had once put her hand on his arm in the barn, and he stopped what he was doing. "Papa," she said. He went very still. He did not look at her right away. He looked at his hands, and at the harness, and at the boards of the porch. Then he looked up. "Yes, sweetheart." "I am hungry." He nodded. He set the harness down. He stood up slowly, the way a man stands up when he is afraid of breaking something, and he held out his hand. She took it. They went inside. He did not tell Clara about it for 2 days. When he did, he told her at the kitchen table, late at night, after the children had gone to bed, and his voice was unsteady for the only time she ever heard it that way. "She called me Papa." "I know." "You knew." "She told Ruth. Ruth told Mary. Mary told me." "Why did nobody tell me?" "Because we thought you should hear it from her, the first time." He sat at the table and he put his face in his hands, just for a moment, and then he took them away and he looked at her across the kitchen. "Clara." "Yes." "I do not know how to be that for her." "You already are." "I do not know how to—" "Wade, listen to me. You are already it. You have been it since the morning you put Tobias on the rug in front of the fire. The word is just the world catching up to the thing. That is all the word ever is, with a child. The thing was already there. Now she has a name for it." He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached across the table and he took her hand, and this time he did not let go right away, and she did not take her hand back. Years passed. The Mercer Ranch became the largest holding in the Upper Valley. Mary married a young surveyor from Bozeman, and she came home twice a year with a baby on her hip, and then 2 babies, and then 3. Caleb went to the agricultural school in Bozeman and came back with ideas about feed and breeding that Wade listened to carefully and adopted slowly, the way a man adopts ideas from his sons. Eli stayed on the ranch and ran cattle, and he was a quieter man than his brother, but he was good with horses and with men, and the hands who worked for the Mercers said they would rather work for Eli than for any other foreman in the valley. Ruth became a school teacher at the crossing, in the same one-room school Mrs. Devereaux had run, and she taught there for 31 years. Lila Mae married a doctor and moved to Helena and had 4 daughters and named the eldest after her mother. Tobias, who had been so small that first winter, grew up to be the tallest of them all, 6'4" in his stocking feet, and he took over the ranch when Wade got too old to ride every day, which was not until he was past 70. It happened slowly that Wade and Clara stopped sleeping in separate rooms. It was not a thing either of them ever talked about afterward, not even to each other. It happened over the course of a winter, the second winter, in a way that seemed at the time to be made out of a great many small choices, none of which had been the big choice, and yet the big choice had been made. They did not have any more children. They had the 6 they had, and the 6 was enough, and the 6 became 16, and then more. And the house that had once held 1 lamp burning, for nobody held lamps in every window on holiday nights, and the long table that had once seated a man and a dog seated 20 when everyone came home for the haying. On a summer evening when Wade was 78 years old and Clara was 73, they sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun go down behind the crazies. The light went the color of a peach. The grandchildren were down at the corral, all 11 of them that were visiting that week, and the sound of their voices came up the slope on the warm air. Wade had a cup of coffee on the rail, and he had not touched it in some time. The old dog at their feet was not Boss, but Boss's grandson's grandson, a brindle with gray on his muzzle, and he was asleep in the last patch of sun. Clara said, "Do you remember what you told me in the wagon?" "What?" "That first night. I asked you why you did it. You said you did not know in any way you could put words on." "I remember." "Do you know now?" He thought about it. "Some," he said. "I think I know some of it, not the whole of it. I am not sure a person ever gets the whole of a thing like that." "What do you know?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think I knew, that morning in the square, that there are not 2 kinds of being lost. There is only the one kind." The woman on the bandstand and the man at the back of the crowd were the same kind of lost. I think I knew it before I had words for it. I think I walked up there because I understood that whatever I gave her, I was going to be giving to myself, and that I had been waiting 4 years to find somebody I could give it to. That is what I think I know now. I did not know it then. I just did the thing. Clara nodded slowly. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "It is a strange thing in this country. The way people talk about family, they talk about it like blood is the strongest thing there is. I have heard men say 1,000 times in my life that blood is thicker than water. I had a father-in-law who said it. He used the word like it was a deed of ownership. He had been given 6 grandchildren by his blood, and he believed that the blood entitled him to them, and he was going to use that entitlement to break them apart and sell them off and call it family while he was doing it. And then there was you, who had not 1 drop of our blood, who had every reason to ride past Black Hollow that morning and never look back. And you did not." "Clara, let me say it. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I want to say it once, and then I will not say it again." "All right. I think blood is not the strongest thing. I think the strongest thing is the choice that gets made when nobody is making you. I think a family is not the people you are born to. A family is the people who stand up in the square when the square is quiet, and the people who let you go to sleep without watching the door, and the people who learn the names of children who do not carry their name. That is what a family is. That is what we made. That is what nobody can take, because nobody gave it. We made it ourselves, you and me and the 6 of them, out of a cold morning and a saddlebag of gold and a great deal of stubbornness, and it has lasted us our whole lives, and it will last past us. That is what I have been thinking. That is what I wanted to say." Wade did not answer her for a long moment. Then he reached over, very slowly, and he took her hand. His was an old hand now, and so was hers, and the skin was thin and brown over the bones, and there was a small white scar across his thumb from a wire that had cut him 40 years ago, and she knew the scar by touch in the dark of any room they had ever been in. Down at the corral, one of the grandchildren let out a high, clear shout of laughter. The dog at their feet stirred and went back to sleep. The light on the mountains went from peach to red to a deep, dark blue. "It will," Wade said. "It will last past us." "Yes, Clara. Yes. I would do it again." "I know." They sat on the porch until the stars came out. After a while, one of the grandchildren came up the slope and stood in front of them with her hands on her hips and told them supper was on, and Aunt Mary said if Grandpa did not come in right now, she was going to feed his portion to the dog. And Wade laughed, and Clara laughed, and they got up out of their chairs slowly, the way old people get up, and they went inside to where the lamps were lit and the long table was full, and every chair was taken, and there was a place set for each one of them at the head of it, side by side, as there had been for a very long time, and as there would be in one form or another for a very long time still to come.